Okay, so we're going to do Pythagorean theorem. Most students have heard Pythagorean theorem before, or they at least know what Pythagorean theorem is when I start writing this equation, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So even if for some reason you have forgotten the words, which it is very common for students to kind of forget the name of it, they tend to recognize this equation right away as I start saying it. So Pythagorean theorem. Why is it named that? Because Pythagorean is the name of the person that came up with the theorem. So they named it after him. So Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we use this in a right triangle, and I'm going to try to draw a right triangle the best I can here. Ooh, that came out a little bit less right triangle than I wanted it to. So in a right triangle, a and b are the legs that make up the right angle. So it doesn't matter which one is A and which one is B. Those make up the right angle. C has to be the one that is across from the right angle. So it's the side that's across. That's the more specific one as far as what goes into the equation here. So if we look at this example for the following right triangle, find the side length x, round your answer to the nearest hundredth. So it says we have 10, we have 9, we have x. So if we look across from the right triangle here, or the right triangle, geez, please, the right angle, that is x. That is our c. So, and they start writing this out. So we have a squared plus b squared. Whoops, I wrote b because I said b. B squared. So does it matter which one's a and which one's b? No. Remember, those are just the two legs that come together to make the right triangle. So 10 and 9 are the two that make the right triangle, or the right angle there. So those are the a and the b. And then we have x squared. So we go through and we start working this out. We have 100 plus 81 equals x squared. And then we get 181 when we add those together, x squared. So when we get to the end here, we just have to go square root. So let's see, do I have calculator still open? Ooh, I do. So if I type in 181, and this is what your calculator should look like. So as long as you're using something like this on the phone or the computer, usually they're pretty similar. You type the number in first, and then you hit this square root button. So mine has the 2 on it. Some don't have the little 2 there. If it doesn't have a 2, it means it's assumed the 2 is there. So if there's no number at all, that means square root. So you click the button, and we have 13.45 equals x. Because remember, x squared actually means there's 2 x's. And what square root means is if for every 2, I get to take 1 out. That's why we just bring down x. Because we have 2 x's, we get to bring down 1. And this one doesn't have an actual square root. It has a decimal square root. So it doesn't have a whole number square root is what I mean. It's not a perfect square. So they want us to round this number to the nearest hundredth. So let's see, I should have written one more number out here. So I'm going to write one more number. I'm going to write a 3 here. Because to round to a hundredth, which is the second number here, the 5, we need to look at the 3 real quick. If the 3 is 5 or bigger, we round this number, this 5 up to the next number, which would be 6. If it's a 4 or smaller, the numbers past it just disappear, and basically we're just rounding down to the 5. So there's nothing past it. It's 5 with a bunch of zeros after it. But we don't have to write the zeros. All we have to write is 13.45. We don't have to write a 0000 after it or anything like that. We're just rounding it off. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to erase, hopefully just this. Perfect. Okay. So now we have something along these lines. So we have x and 8, and we have 10. And remember, a and b are the ones that make this 90-degree angle. So the 2 lines that make this 90-degree angle are x and 8. This is my a and my b here. Right? It's a little bit crooked on that one. So I have x squared plus 8 squared, and that's going to equal c, which is across from the right angle there, so 10 squared. I have x squared plus 64 equals 100. And if you go to your calculator, and you go 8, there is a square button also. So you have the X with the little 2 next to it. Some of them also have a cube button, but most of them have at least a squared button. So you can hit squared. You can go 10 and hit squared, and then it'll tell you. So if you don't know your squares right off the top of your head, you can also use the calculator to do that real quick. Ooh, my whole paper here. Turn it, didn't mean, oh no. Okay, I'm gonna leave it alone because it keeps messing up. All right, so now I wanna get x squared by itself. I need to bring this 64 and 100 together. So this goes back to our solving equations rules. So I'm gonna do the opposite of what's being done. I'm gonna subtract 64 because that undoes the addition. That's the whole idea there. And remember, you have to do whatever you do to one side. So this is the left side of the equation, meaning the left side of the equal sign. I have to do the same to the right side of the equal sign. So just those same rules of solving an equation. I'm going to bring x squared down. 64 minus 64 crosses off, equals 100 minus 64 is 36. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Remember, x squared actually means I have x times x here. That's what that means. So if I have two x's, or two of anything, it means I can take out 1. And then 36, if you know your squares, then you know that 6 times 6 gets you 36. So in order to have a perfect square or whole number answer, you have to be able to do something like this, where you have the same number multiplying to get the bigger number. So I know I can pull out 1 6. That is my answer. So x has to be 6. Alrighty. So I'm going to erase. I'm going to erase up here too because you can't see it since I moved my paper, darn it. All right, next. I'll do a couple more of these. Eight x 12. Okay, so very similar to the other one. We're just, instead of 10, now it's 12. So remember, these are still the legs. And by legs, I mean which ones create this 90-degree angle here. And it's touching those two, so that's another clue that that's what I mean by, you can see that this little square actually touches both of those other two blue lines I drew. All right, so we have x squared plus 8 squared, because these are a and b, and that's going to equal c squared, which is across from that 90-degree mark, like this. All right, so I have x squared plus 64 equals 144. So now I'm going to subtract 64 just like I did on the last one. So remember, I'm trying to get x squared by itself. I need to undo what's being done here. So I'm adding 64 on this left side. So in order to undo that, I'm going to subtract 64 from both sides, because that undoes the addition part of it. So I bring x squared down. 64 minus 64 crosses out. That becomes 0, which is exactly what I wanted to happen. And then I'm going to have, I believe, 80, which is not going to have a nice square root. So I'm going to open my calculator back up here. So just to confirm, you can always confirm it real quick. So we get 80. I know my squares pretty well, so I know 80 does not have a perfect square root. So I'm going to use this calculator, and I'm going to hit square root. I did forget to add my little symbols over here because I'm taking the square root. So I have x equals 8.944. I'll just go 2. I don't really need to go out that far. They want us to round to 100th here. So I'm looking at this first 4, or the second number past the decimal. I need to look at the number right after it. 4 or smaller means that everything just drops off and nothing actually changes here. If it were 5 or bigger, we'd have to round this number up to the next one, which would be 5. But since it's 4 or smaller, we're just going to cross that off, and this becomes our answer. So we just typed in 8.94. Check. And there we go. All right, one more of these. Let me erase. Okay, this one is drawn. And I'm not drawing this one very well at all, but we'll pretend like I drew a 90-degree angle here. All right, so we have 12, we have 10, and we have x. So I'm going to switch to red here. So remember, we want to know which ones make this 90-degree angle. So it's the two that it's touching when I do this. So it's this line, and it's this line here. So the 12 and the 10 are my a squared and my b squared. And that's going to equal the number that's across from that right angle mark, which is x squared in this case. So I have 144 plus 100 equals x squared. If I add these two together, I get 244 equals x squared. I want to take the square root. Again, I know my squares pretty well. I know that this does not have a square root. If you didn't have your squares memorized, no big deal. You can always have the calculator out anyway. So I have 244, and I'm going to take the square root of that. So I'm going to end up with 15.620 equals x. I want to round to 100th, so I'm going to look, since it's a 0, that's really easy. It just drops off. We just ignore it because 0 is not going to round anything up or down. It's already a 0. That's kind of nice. So 15.62. Ta-da! Yay! All right, so another one down.